Hello and welcome to another edition of Professor Speaks. My name is Alex Hernandez. Alongside me as always is Dr. Craig Stern. And today I wanted to talk to you about this tweet that I'm sure the country saw from Senator Bernie Sanders, claiming that the drug prices here in America are 4 times more expensive than drugs in Canada, for the same drug, of course. And wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, because you would think that life-saving drugs wouldn't be a part of this for-profit model, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the issue of all these comparisons is a true one. I mean, to be fair,
right.
If you look at the price of drugs in England or Germany or France, the United States, Canada, etc., you're going to see big differences.
So it's more than just Canada. It's
more than just Canada.
The entire world.
People have been surprised that the drug world is international, but in fact it is. And drugs are being made significantly in other countries. The greatest source of generic raw materials is Israel. The greatest source of raw materials for branded drugs is India. And so this is an international market in what goes on.
Right.
Now, with regard to that, the problem that we have is most definitely you can compare in that they're cheaper. No question about that, and we have no argument about that. The issue is that Americans can't buy it at those costs because there have been laws that have been established where the largest payers in the world, namely Medicare in the United States, Medicaid in different states,
right,
cannot negotiate with the manufacturers over drug price. So on one level, there's the problem where you can't go out and go to Canada, go to Victoria or Winnipeg or wherever, and just go in and buy drugs and come back with it and all of that. Now, there are some limits on it, but I won't get into all of the issues about whether you can have one individual drug and bring it in versus something else. But the bottom line here is that, yes, there's significant differences. Pharma's argument is that we need this money in order to create new product. Other people's argument, the patient argument, doctor's argument is we need it to be cheaper so people don't delay getting drugs, aren't afraid of not getting the drug that they're actually going to get.
And have significant consequences.
And have significant consequences.
Yeah,
this argument goes on. I understand what Bernie Sanders is trying to do. We're not trying to create a Democrat versus Republican argument. We're just trying to identify what the reality of that
or
is.
Independent in his case. But,
yes, independent.
But one thing that I think a lot of people don't really understand is why is there such this limitation on Medicare or Medicaid that they can't negotiate drug prices. It would seem in a capitalist society negotiation should be part of every deal, right?
Well, in managed care, one of the standard fundamentals is that it is a competitive marketplace and everybody can negotiate on the cost of drugs.
Right.
However, within Medicare, there are laws that occurred under Medicare Part D and others that have said that the federal government can't negotiate with the pharmaceutical manufacturers over cost. That, on the other hand, is not true in other countries. They do negotiate. In many cases, they don't even approve some of those drugs in what they do. So in this particular case, federal government regulations enter the process, and whether it is lobbyists or whether it's pharma, whether it's the federal government, whatever, we're not going to get into that argument right now, but bottom line is that there is a difference. So someone can't just go call up a Canadian pharmacy, order a dozen drugs and have them shipped in. You may be able to do it with 1 or 2 for personal use, but that means you go there, you pick it up, you get it, you bring it here. You have to have a prescription from a Canadian doctor, so the American doctor has to write a prescription, and that you have to go to a Canadian doctor to reevaluate, to deal with it. This is not an uncomplicated issue just to be able to come up with less competitive drugs. Now, clearly it's a big thing, a big topic, and everybody's talking about it. Will anything happen? Well, so far nothing has happened for at least a couple of decades. Will it happen? Who knows?
Yeah. Well, we can go down a whole rabbit hole with that one. Because it's mind-boggling how you can't. It's government-funded, Medicare, Medicaid. They use government money, but they seem to pay the highest prices for drugs.
They do.
So it's puzzling. But there's also Purdue Pharma now. Now they've been in the news a lot. They've had to dish out money for mainly because they're the sole. Well, they were at the time for OxyCotin. They were the sole manufacturer for OxyCotin. And I believe you mentioned it was about $600 million that they've had to pay off, at least that we know of, in regards to settlements and lawsuits. But what does this mean for Purdue Pharma going forward?
Well, the main news happening is that Purdue Pharma has now stopped promoting opiate drugs to physicians.
Right.
Now, they're not the first. There have been several manufacturers who said, we're not going to do it either.
It's about time.
But Purdue Pharma insists as a second company. Both of them have had a very high profile in the use of opiates. And so now Purdue Pharma is saying, we won't do it like other manufacturers have done. It means they're cutting their workforce by half at least. They're not going to be promoting to the doctors. And the rationale was that by promoting to doctors, doctors wrote more prescriptions for opiates. As a result of that, we have greater utilization and therefore greater number of people who have opiate abuse, etc.
Now, do we know, have they came out and said or actually agreed with most of the studies that are out there about the tendencies that OxyContin has about it leading to addiction? Because I know that they've had a lot of reports come out that they don't believe what the studies are showing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate going on. The Centers for Disease Control has come up with new guidelines for it. We even, in our experience and what we did in West Virginia and Virginia and Illinois, Indiana, etc., we identified that people who were making at that time about $50,000 a year were supplementing their income and getting another $50,000 by selling drugs, and they were getting about $100 a tablet for OxyContin. Wow. So there was a financial motive done by patients as well as doctors. We even had a patient, if you recall, who was telling one of our representatives that he had a surgeon who was removing organs that could be removed, like his appendix and things like that, in order to get prescriptions for opiates so he could make more money. So, I mean, this isn't everybody. It's not every patient. We have these crazy stories of what goes on that implicates doctors, implicates patients, implicates everybody. Bottom line here in this regard is that there is a significant emphasis on opiates. The manufacturers are responding to that because it's governmental as well as public, etc. But the bottom line is we created the problem, and now we have to solve it.
Yeah, and it seems like a huge issue now, and you start looking back on news articles. It's been going on since late '80s, right?
Yes.
And there was something about opiate manufacturers paying patient advocacy groups to promote more opiate prescriptions.
Yeah, that's been a controversial issue. If you go on the internet, for example, and you take a look, you want to find out some information about a particular topic, and you see that there's patient advocacy groups, and you think, well, they're perhaps independent. They can give you the straight scoop. You can get the information about it. Well, it turns out, and it's been well known, this is not new, that pharmaceutical manufacturers have either established those groups or funded those groups, so that, in fact, what those groups are saying is something that is favorable to manufacturers of opiates and, frankly, other drugs in other diseases. And many of the patient advocacy groups are funded by manufacturers, whether it's diabetes groups or hypertension groups or congestive heart failure groups or asthma groups, whatever, and opiate groups, paying them in order to have a good message that comes out about it. So people that go to the internet have to be very careful. You can't just go out and pick anybody and say, well, these people are patient advocates, therefore I can get the straight story and they won't lie to me. In fact, many of them you have to look and find out how are they funded, because many of them are funded by that. And doctors have been funded by that. They've set up studies where the manufacturers paid them to do that. Well, some of that is very real. I mean, they're setting up studies and they need real data from real patients in order to do that. Right. Some of that is, of course, marketing issue. It's hard to tell the difference frequently. But people just have to be careful about what they're looking at, because data may not be so altruistic as you think. Right, right. And we've mentioned this whole topic about manufacturers before, and about how they've turned into some part in the history, they've turned into more of a advertising group. Like a lot of their CEOs they come from a marketing background and things of that nature. Well, in the 80s and 70s, etc., manufacturers were mostly known as a research and development group that was coming up with new drugs, and then they had a marketing arm. Which makes sense. Which makes ultimate sense. But today there is so much money involved in marketing that most of them have now become major marketing arms, and they're getting drugs from innovative companies, some of the biotechnology companies that don't have big marketing arms. Right. So they form deals or buy some of these programs in order to try and bulk up, because they have these huge marketing that actually work. I mean, they have they're very good at marketing. They're very good at supporting. Their argument is, we're telling people who have a particular diagnosis, a particular condition, here's the issues and here's the solution. Right. People who contradict that say, well, all you're doing is trying to promote your given drug. There's a constant argument going on. We're not taking a position right now about that. All we're trying to say is that there is an argument going on, and clearly the drug companies have become more marketing firms than research and development, because the research and development is either being done in universities with government money or being done through Medicare programs or otherwise that are being funded, or through private companies or public companies that are being paid for by innovation money. And of course they want to get their return on whatever they've spent in developing the drug. Of course. I mean, it makes sense, and it also makes sense when you see in the news that there are large pharma companies or pharma manufacturing companies combining and creating one major pharma company. Like some biotech businesses also, Celgene and bought Juno, right? For instance, I mean, there's a huge amount of cost going into these marketing things where they have to come up with money to research their R&D department. Yes, that's true. But I mean, to put it in perspective, pharmaceutical manufacturers have been consolidating and buying firms forever. There's nothing new about that. They go out, they see a firm, they see something that has great potential as a drug, and frequently they consolidate. No surprise. However, the issue with regard to the biotechnology world, which is relatively new, is that it costs a lot of money to develop the new drug. So they need revenue in order to be able to fill the gap of how much money they've spent in research and development. Well, to fill that, they go out and they consolidate with another company, or they buy another company, or otherwise that particular company may have a drug or otherwise that has huge revenues, and that fills that gap in what goes on. So it's not uncommon. I mean, it's just basic business about what people do. Investors are certainly looking at it to see where should they invest, where should they put their money. So there's nothing new about that. But it's just following the standard kind of process. And now because there are some drugs that are huge blockbusters and others that are not that great. Everybody is fighting over where is the newest, latest drug, because it's not coming out of the major pharmaceutical manufacturers. It's coming out of these other smaller firms.
Right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. If you have any other questions or comments related to what we were talking about, or if you feel you want to touch on a subject that you want us to talk about, feel free to leave a comment below or message us directly. And please visit propharmaconsultants.com. We have a free information page for all your healthcare needs. It's in that information page. It's called RxInfoX. And we will see you next week.